Did medieval people always bow down to their elders? What happened when gray hairs weren't respected? Dive into the fascinating world of senior treatment from the 5th to the 15th century. Number 1. The Dowager Queen's Exile. The wind howled a mournful tune through the drafty stone corridors of the castle of Carcassonne, a sound that seemed to echo the inner turmoil of Queen Eleanor of Provence, or rather the Dowager Queen Eleanor, as she was now pointedly called. Her husband, King Louis IX, had been dead for many years, and her son, Philip III, sat on the throne. Eleanor, a woman of formidable will and sharp political instincts, had served as regent during her son's minority and had fully expected to continue wielding significant influence at court. She was past 60, her hair a silver crown, her face etched with the lines of countless battles of wit and diplomacy. Her reputation was that of a shrewd negotiator and a fiercely protective mother, one who had often clashed with her husband's advisors, yet always for what she believed was the good of France. But times were changing. Philip, now a grown man, had his own advisors, younger men, ambitious and keen to escape the shadow of the formidable old queen. They saw Eleanor not as a fount of wisdom or a pillar of stability, but as an obstruction, a relic of a past era too vocal, too opinionated, and too quick to challenge their strategies. The king, perhaps weary of his mother's sometimes overbearing nature, perhaps simply eager to assert his own independence, began to distance himself. The disrespect was subtle at first, a missed invitation to a council meeting, a new decree passed without her consultation, a dismissive tone when she offered counsel. These slights, small yet cumulative, chipped away at her authority, making her feel less like the revered mother of the king and more like an unwelcome guest. Then came the more overt acts. Her dower lands, though legally secured, began to suffer from neglect. Under royal administration, their revenues siphoned off for other purposes. Her household staff, once large and loyal, found their allowances reduced, their positions uncertain. Rumors, undoubtedly spread by those who wished to see her gone, began to circulate whispers of her excessive spending, her alleged meddling in foreign policy, her supposed senility. Eleanor, still sharp of mind, was acutely aware of these machinations. She confronted her son, her voice perhaps more shrill than majestic, her arguments still logical but delivered with a desperation that undermined her power. The king listened, impassive, and then offered her a solution. A gilded cage, he suggested. She retire to a comfortable but remote convent, perhaps one she herself had founded, to dedicate her remaining years to prayer and contemplation. The proposal was presented as an act of piety, a noble gesture befitting a queen, but Eleanor knew it was banishment. It was a thinly veiled attempt to remove her from the political chessboard entirely. To send a woman of her standing, a former regent, a queen consort, to a monastic retreat before her natural passing was an undeniable act of profound disrespect. It signaled that her contributions were no longer valued, her presence no longer desired. It stripped her of her agency, her voice, and her hard-won influence. Eleanor, recognizing the futility of resistance against a son who held all the power, reluctantly agreed. She departed for the Abbey of Fontevraud, a place of spiritual solace, but also a symbolic prison for a woman who had once navigated the treacherous currents of European politics with such skill. Her final years were spent within those cloistered walls, receiving visits from her daughters, but largely isolated from the court life she had once commanded. Her story, preserved in chroniclers' accounts of the French monarchy, serves as a poignant reminder that even the most powerful of seniors could find their authority eroded and their presence dismissed once their active usefulness to the younger generation waned. The respect once freely given, born of necessity and genuine admiration, could quickly curdle into a desire for their removal, especially when they became an obstacle to new ambitions. Number 2. The Master Weaver's Demotion. In the bustling cloth town of Bruges during the 14th century, the Guild of the Weavers held immense power and prestige. Their looms spun the finest wool into fabrics that were sought after across Europe, bringing immense wealth to the city. At the very pinnacle of this craft stood Master Gerard, a man whose hands had guided threads for over 50 years. His eyesight was no longer as keen as it once was, and his fingers, gnarled by decades of repetitive motion, sometimes trembled, but his mind remained a treasure trove of intricate patterns, dye formulas, and the subtle nuances of wool quality. He had trained generations of apprentices, some of whom now ran their own successful workshops. His reputation for meticulousness and innovation was legendary, and his word was usually considered law within the guild. For many years, the younger masters deferred to him, seeking his advice on complex designs or difficult orders. They respected his deep understanding of the craft, his ability to spot a flaw no one else could see, and his wisdom in handling temperamental clients or resolving disputes among the journeymen. When new guild regulations were proposed, Master Gerard was always consulted, his opinion carrying significant weight. He was often seen at guild meetings, his silver hair catching the light, his voice, though softer than it once was, still commanding attention. Young apprentices would watch him with awe, hoping to absorb even a fraction of his skill and knowledge. However, as the years piled on, Master Gerard's pace naturally slowed. He could not work the looms with the same speed, or for the same long hours as the younger, more energetic weavers. His apprentices, now journeymen and masters themselves, grew restless. They saw his slower pace as an impediment to the guild's overall efficiency, especially as competition from other cloth centers intensified. New methods were emerging, faster looms, different finishing techniques, and while Master Gerard acknowledged their existence, he often preferred the tried and true ways that had brought him success for so long. He viewed some of the newer, quicker processes as a compromise on quality, a point he frequently and sometimes stubbornly argued. The younger masters, eager to embrace these innovations and maximize profits, began to hold meetings without him, making decisions on production quotas and market strategies before presenting them to the General Guild Assembly. His advice, once sought, was now often dismissed, with a polite nod and a quick change of topic. His once unquestioned authority began to erode, replaced by a subtle but persistent sidelining. They would nod along as he spoke, then proceed with their own plans, leaving him feeling increasingly irrelevant. The pinnacle of disrespect came when the guild voted to appoint a new head of the Quality Control Committee, a position Master Gerard had held for decades with undisputed authority. The younger masters argued, with thinly veiled criticisms of his fading eyesight and slower reflexes, that a more vigorous and modern-minded individual was needed to ensure the guild's competitive edge. Master Gerard, deeply wounded, felt the sting of this public demotion. It was a clear message that his experience, his lifelong dedication, and his hard-won wisdom were no longer valued above raw speed and youthful ambition. He continued to attend guild meetings, but his voice was quieter, his contributions fewer. He still worked at his loom, albeit less frequently, his movements deliberate, imbued with the echoes of a mastery that was now largely unacknowledged. The once revered master weaver, the standard-bearer of Bruges' cloth industry, became a figure of historical interest rather than a current authority, a living testament to the often brutal reality that even in professions demanding lifelong skill, old age could bring with it an erosion of respect and a loss of standing. His story, recounted in guild records and local histories, became a cautionary tale for those who believed their legacy alone would protect them from the relentless march of time and the ambitions of the next generation. Number 3. The scorned village seer. In the small, isolated Anglo-Saxon village of Oakhaven, nestled deep within the rolling hills of Wessex in the 9th century, wisdom was a currency as vital as coin and often more respected. Old Wolf Hild with her long braided white hair and eyes that seemed to hold the secrets of the earth, was the undisputed seer and healer of the community. She had been born in the village, had seen generations come and go, and knew the rhythms of the land, the subtle signs of changing weather and the properties of every herb in the surrounding woods. Villagers came to her for everything, for ailments that baffled the local midwife, for guidance on planting crops, for interpreting strange dreams, and even for advice on difficult family disputes. Her knowledge of ancient lore passed down through oral tradition was seen as a direct link to the ancestors and the spirits of the land. Wulfhild's cottage, though modest, was always tended to by younger women who sought to learn from her, hoping to absorb her wisdom. Children would often gather outside her door, listening to her tell stories of the old days, of great frosts and bountiful harvests, of battles and peace. When an important decision needed to be made, whether it was about relocating the pigs, building a new fence, or choosing a new village elder, Wulfhild's counsel was sought. Her opinions, often delivered in riddles or ancient proverbs, were carefully weighed and usually followed. Her age, far from being a burden, was seen as a testament to her enduring connection to the divine and to her accumulated understanding of the world. She held a position of profound respect, not because of wealth or power, but because of the invaluable knowledge and spiritual guidance she provided. However, a harsh winter descended upon Oakhaven, longer and colder than any in living memory. The harvest had been poor, and sickness, the sweating sickness, swept through the village, claiming young and old alike. Fear began to grip the community. The usual remedies and prayers seemed to fail. Desperate for answers, a new, younger priest arrived from a distant monastery, bringing with him new ways of thinking, new doctrines, and a profound suspicion of anything that smacked of pagan traditions. He preached loudly about divine judgment, about the evils of old beliefs, and about the need to cleanse the community of dark influences. Wulfhild, with her reliance on herbs and ancient charms, her whispered conversations with the spirits of the forest, and her visions, became a target. The priest, seeing her as a direct threat to his authority and his interpretation of the new faith, began to subtly undermine her. He preached against sorcery and heathen practices in the village church, his gaze often sweeping towards Wulfhild's usual pew. He told the villagers that their sickness was a punishment for listening to false prophets. The younger villagers, already terrified by the plague and eager for any solution, began to look at Wulfhild with suspicion instead of reverence. When a particularly virulent outbreak hit the children, and Wulfhild's remedies seemed unable to stem the tide, the whispers turned into accusations. Some of the younger, more impressionable villagers, egged on by the priest, began to openly scorn her, calling her a witch or a hag. They blamed her for the misfortunes, claiming her old ways had angered the new god. Her cottage, once a beacon of hope, became a place of avoidance. No longer did children gather to hear her stories. Instead, they threw stones at her door. No longer did women seek her remedies. They now feared her touch. The profound respect she had commanded for decades, built on a lifetime of service and inherited wisdom, disintegrated under the weight of fear, religious fervor, and societal upheaval. Old Wulfhild died that winter, not of the sickness, but of a broken spirit, cast aside and reviled by the very community she had so faithfully served. Her story is a chilling reminder that even in seemingly stable societies, fear and outside influences could shatter the deeply entrenched respect for the elderly and their traditional knowledge. Number 4. The Betrayed Baron and His Heir. Baron de Montfort, a grizzled veteran of countless skirmishes and border wars, had spent his entire life building his family's domain in the tumultuous French-English borderlands of the 13th century. He was a man of iron will, unyielding in his defense of his lands, and fiercely loyal to his liege lord. His castle, though imposing, was a testament to his practical nature, built for defense rather than comfort. His vassals respected him for his fairness, his unwavering strength, and his long-standing experience in navigating the complex web of feudal alliances and rivalries. He had seen 3 kings come and go, had survived sieges, famines, and political purges, always emerging with his lands intact and his family's prestige undiminished. He was well into his 70s, his body stiff with old wounds, but his mind remained sharp, his strategic acumen undimmed. His only surviving son, a hot-headed young man named Guillaume, had long chafed under his father's meticulous oversight. Guillaume was ambitious, impatient, and eager to prove himself, but he lacked his father's long-term vision and his cautious approach. The old baron believed in steady accumulation of power, in careful diplomacy, and in avoiding unnecessary conflicts. Guillaume, however, dreamed of grand conquests, of expanding the family's holdings through audacious campaigns, and of dazzling feats of arms. He saw his father's prudence as weakness, his caution as cowardice, and his continued hold on power as an obstacle to his own glory. The baron, for his part, tried to instill wisdom in his son, to teach him the nuances of governance and the harsh realities of warfare, but his words often fell on deaf ears. The disrespect began subtly, a muttered complaint under Guillaume's breath when his father issued an order, a deliberate tardiness to a council meeting, a slight sneer when the baron recounted a past victory. Guillaume started making decisions for parts of the estate without consulting his father, claiming urgency or oversight, but in reality he was testing the boundaries of his authority. The old baron, though hurt, tried to maintain familial harmony, chalking it up to youthful arrogance. However, the disrespect escalated into a deliberate plot. The baron had been in a prolonged dispute with a neighboring lord over a fertile strip of land, a dispute he was carefully negotiating towards a peaceful resolution, knowing that open conflict would be costly and prolonged. Guillaume, without his father's knowledge, secretly rallied a small force of his own knights and launched a surprise raid on the disputed territory, seizing it by force. The act was a blatant defiance of his father's authority and a catastrophic blow to his carefully constructed diplomacy. The neighboring lord, enraged, prepared for full-scale war, accusing the baron of treachery. When the baron confronted Guillaume, his son, far from expressing remorse, openly declared that his father was too old, too cautious, and too slow to properly defend their family's interests. He stated that the old ways were no longer effective, and that new, bolder leadership was required. He had essentially usurped his father's military authority, and, by extension, his overall command of the domain. Faced with open rebellion from his own son, and with the loyalty of many younger knights shifting towards the more aggressive Guillaume, the old baron had little choice. He was forced to publicly cede military command to his son, effectively retiring from active leadership, though he remained the theoretical head of the household. His name still carried weight, but his actual power had been stripped, not by an external enemy, but by the very heir he had painstakingly raised. The sight of the old baron, once the embodiment of strength, now stooped and silent in the shadow of his arrogant son, was a powerful symbol of the disrespect that could be meted out to an elder, even one who had dedicated his life to protecting his lineage. This kind of dynastic power struggle, where a younger generation forcibly sidelined an older one, was a recurring theme in the annals of medieval nobility, a harsh lesson in the transient nature of authority. Number 5. The monk's unwavering authority. Brother Thomas, a Benedictine monk of nearly 80 years, had lived within the stone walls of St. Albans Abbey since he was a boy, his life a tapestry woven with prayer, study, and meticulous transcription. He was the head librarian and scriptorium master, his hands, though frail with age, still capable of the most exquisite calligraphy. His memory was a vast archive of theological texts, ancient histories, and the abbey's own detailed records reaching back centuries. Young novices and even seasoned monks would approach him with deference, seeking his guidance on obscure biblical passages, the correct formulation of a chant, or the proper method for preserving a delicate manuscript. He was a living encyclopedia, his wisdom derived from a lifetime of rigorous intellectual and spiritual discipline. In the structured world of the monastery, where hierarchy was clearly defined, age often conferred deep respect and authority, especially when coupled with knowledge and piety. Brother Thomas had earned this respect, not through brute force or political maneuvering, but through his profound humility, his unwavering dedication to his vows, and his unparalleled expertise in the abbey's most sacred and vital work, the preservation and creation of books. When a young monk, Brother Alaric, a newly arrived scholar from a more modern Parisian university, began to advocate for faster, less meticulous methods of manuscript production, arguing for quantity over the time-consuming perfection Brother Thomas championed. The younger monk initially dismissed the old master's concerns. Alaric, full of youthful zeal and academic arrogance, saw Brother Thomas's methods as antiquated, a relic of a slower age. He openly questioned the necessity of such elaborate illuminations and such painstaking care for each letter, when more efficient methods could produce more texts for a wider audience. He, even on one occasion, tried to introduce a new, more simplified script, arguing it was easier to read and faster to write. He presented his ideas to the abbot, implying that the old ways of Brother Thomas were holding the abbey back. The abbot, a man who respected tradition but was also open to innovation, listened carefully to both arguments. However, the abbot also understood the profound value of Brother Thomas's reputation and his unique contribution to the abbey's standing. The abbey's scriptorium was renowned throughout England for the beauty and accuracy of its manuscripts, a reputation built on the very meticulousness Alaric sought to abandon. Furthermore, the older monks, many of whom had been trained by Brother Thomas, quietly but firmly supported their master. They revered him not just for his skill but for his character, his profound understanding of the monastic rule, and his role as a spiritual anchor. They knew that the new ways might be faster, but they lacked the spiritual dedication and artistic integrity that Brother Thomas imbued in every page. When the abbot finally made his decision, he did so with the full weight of the monastic community behind him. He publicly affirmed Brother Thomas's methods as the standard for the scriptorium, praising his dedication and his incomparable skill. He gently but firmly reminded Brother Alaric of the importance of tradition and the value of accumulated wisdom. Brother Alaric was instructed to apprentice directly under Brother Thomas to learn the old ways, before attempting to innovate. The act was a clear demonstration of respect for the elder monk's authority and experience. Brother Thomas, though frail, stood taller that day, his authority not only upheld but reinforced. He continued to guide the scriptorium for several more years, ensuring that the abbey's legacy of beautiful and accurate manuscripts endured, a testament to the fact that in certain environments profound knowledge and dedicated service could outweigh youthful ambition and secure a lasting position of respect for the elder. His example highlights how deeply ingrained respect for intellectual and spiritual elders could be within medieval monastic orders, valuing continuity and tradition above fleeting trends. Number 6. The exiled elder peasant. Agnes, a woman of perhaps 70 years, had lived her entire life in the small Norman village of Sainte-Marie-du-Bois. She was a widow, her husband and all her children having succumbed to various ailments or the great famine of the late 12th century. She no longer owned land, having sold off her small plot to pay for her husband's burial and her children's medicines. Her home was a small, dilapidated hovel on the edge of the village, and her daily bread depended on the charity of her neighbors and the meager work she could still manage, gleaning in the fields after harvest or spinning flax for the village women. Her hands were arthritic, her back permanently bent, and her eyes dimmed by cataracts. In theory, medieval society often paid lip service to the respect due to elders, particularly those who had lived long and laborious lives. In practice, for the poorest and most vulnerable, old age could bring profound neglect and even abandonment. Agnes was no longer a productive member of the agricultural workforce. Her strength gone, her ability to contribute to the communal labor of the manor diminished. She was a mouth to feed, a body to shelter, with little tangible return. The local lord, concerned primarily with the productivity of his manor, saw her as a drain on resources. The village community, struggling themselves against poverty and hardship, often prioritized the young and able-bodied. The neglect began subtly. When the annual allotment of firewood was distributed, Agnes's portion was often smaller or less seasoned. When new well repairs were organized, her hovel, being on the outskirts, was often the last to benefit from cleaner water access. The village women, busy with their own large families and endless chores, found less time to bring her scraps of food or mend her threadbare clothes. Her pleas for help were met with polite but firm refusals, often accompanied by the reasoning that others were in greater need, or that the resources were simply too scarce. The local priest, while offering spiritual comfort, had little material assistance to provide, beyond what the struggling villagers themselves could spare. The true disrespect came in the form of effective abandonment. One harsh winter, the Lord's Reeve, the manor manager, made a formal inspection of the village's structures. Agnes's hovel was deemed uninhabitable and a danger to public health, ostensibly due to its disrepair, but also because it represented an unproductive liability. The Reeve, under the Lord's implicit direction, ordered Agnes to vacate the hovel. There was no offer of alternative housing, no provision for her care. The expectation was that she would either move in with a relative, which she had none, or none willing to take her in, or simply leave the village. Agnes, with nowhere to go, was effectively exiled from the only home she had ever known. She had to gather her few meager possessions, a wooden bowl, a worn blanket, a few old prayers, and begin a lonely journey. She became a beggar, relying on the tenuous charity of strangers in distant villages or the occasional generosity of travelers on the road. Her advanced age, far from being a badge of honor, made her vulnerable to exploitation and mockery. She was a burden, a reminder of mortality, a symbol of poverty that many wished to ignore. Her story, though not individually chronicled, was recabated countless times among the poorest and most infirm elderly in medieval Europe. Without the safety net of a robust family or a supportive community, and outside the care of monastic charity that often prioritized their own or the deserving poor elderly individuals, like Agnes could face a harsh reality of destitution and complete lack of respect, their very existence seen as an inconvenience to a society focused on productivity and survival. Number 7. The Enfeebled Knight's Last Stand. Sir Reginald, a knight of the Welsh marches, was a man whose very name had once struck fear into the hearts of his enemies and inspired loyalty among his retainers. For 50 years his banner had flown proudly. His sword had been wielded in countless border raids and defensive actions against the perpetually restless Welsh. He was a master of the lance, a formidable tactician, and a pillar of the Anglo-Norman presence in a treacherous land. He was nearing 70, his body scarred by old wounds, his eyesight beginning to fail, but his mind remained a sharp tactical instrument honed by a lifetime of conflict. His eldest son, also named Reginald, but commonly known as young Reginald, was ambitious, impetuous, and deeply resentful of his father's continued command. Young Reginald believed his father's caution, born of experience and past losses, was a sign of weakness, and that his insistence on adhering to traditional slower siege tactics was holding their family back from greater glory and territorial expansion. The old knight, though slower still, insisted on leading his men, even if it meant being hoisted onto his war horse. His voice, once a thunderous roar, was now a gravelly whisper, but it still carried the weight of authority. His retainers, many of whom had served under him for decades, remained fiercely loyal, respecting his long years of service and his deep knowledge of the marches. They knew that his wisdom, though slow in coming, was often superior to young Reginald's rash impulsiveness. The disrespect began subtly, with young Reginald openly questioning his father's orders in front of the men, then openly dismissing his advice in council meetings. He started planning raids and skirmishes without his father's full knowledge, presenting them as fate's accomplice. He would often mock his father's slowness, his fading eyesight, and his preference for defensive fortifications over aggressive attacks. He began to gather around him younger, more aggressive knights who saw the future in his bold vision rather than in the steady, cautious hand of the elder Sir Reginald. The ultimate act of disrespect came during a particularly brutal Welsh uprising. The family's primary castle, Caerleon, was under siege, its walls battered by Welsh trebuchets. Old Sir Reginald, despite his infirmities, had been meticulously planning the defense, husbanding their meager supplies, and organizing sorties to harass the besiegers. He advocated for a protracted defense, hoping for royal relief or for the Welsh forces to exhaust themselves. Young Reginald, however, grew impatient. He saw an opportunity for a decisive, glorious charge that would break the siege and earn him renown. Against his father's explicit orders and desperate pleas, young Reginald rallied a large contingent of their best knights and launched a premature, ill-conceived sally against the main Welsh encampment. The charge was a disaster. The Welsh, forewarned by their scouts, were prepared. Young Reginald's forces were surrounded, and many of the family's most experienced knights, the very backbone of their fighting strength, were cut down or captured. Young Reginald himself barely escaped with his life, returning to the castle wounded and humiliated. The sally had not only failed, but had severely weakened the castle's defenses and demoralized the remaining garrison. The siege continued now with far less hope of relief. Old Sir Reginald, witnessing the utter ruin of his meticulous plans and the wanton squandering of his family's fighting force, was devastated. He publicly rebuked his son, not just for his failure, but for his profound disrespect and disregard for accumulated wisdom. Though he still held the nominal title of Baron, his authority had been openly flouted, his life's work undermined, and his counsel proven to be superior, albeit too late. The family's reputation, once unassailable, was now tarnished, their strength severely diminished, all because a younger, arrogant heir had prioritized his own ambition and disregarded the profound experience of his elder. The story of Sir Reginald and his ambitious son, a common narrative thread in the chronicles of noble families, starkly illustrates how the impatience and perceived superiority of a younger generation could lead to profound disrespect and catastrophic consequences for the elder, regardless of their past achievements or proven wisdom. Number 8. The esteemed matron of the household. Lady Isabella, the matriarch of the powerful de Warenne family in 15th century England, was a woman of immense influence and respect. Her husband, Lord Thomas, had died nearly 20 years prior, leaving her as the sole surviving parent of their 3 grown children and the effective manager of their vast estates. In an era where many widows were quickly remarried or sidelined, Isabella, in her late 60s, had retained control of her dower lands and, more importantly, her active role in the family's affairs. She was renowned for her shrewd management of finances, her sharp legal mind, and her ability to navigate the treacherous currents of court politics. She corresponded regularly with powerful nobles, arbitrated disputes among her tenants, and oversaw the intricate details of her household, from the granaries to the training of new servants. Her children, though adults with their own growing families, regularly sought her counsel. Her eldest son, Sir Arthur, who technically inherited the main barony, often relied on her advice for managing their extensive network of manors. Her experience in agricultural cycles and tenant relations proving invaluable. Her daughters consulted her on marriage alliances, household management, and the raising of their own children. Her grandchildren, too, looked to her with a mixture of awe and affection, drawn by her stories of past eras and her gentle yet firm guidance. She was the family's living memory, the repository of their history, their traditions, and their connections. The respect shown to Lady Isabella was multifaceted. It stemmed from her proven competence and administrative skill, her long years of experience in managing complex estates, and her ability to maintain and even expand the family's wealth and influence. It was also rooted in the deeply ingrained medieval ideal of honoring one's parents and elders. Her very presence commanded a certain deference. When she spoke in council, even the most boisterous knights would fall silent. When she gave an instruction, it was carried out without question. She often presided over family gatherings and local disputes, her judgment considered fair and wise. Young knights aspiring to noble service often sought a place in her household, knowing that learning from such a formidable and respected lady would provide an unparalleled education in governance and courtly manners. A minor lord from a neighboring county once attempted to encroach on a portion of the De Warenne lands, believing that with Lord Thomas gone the family would be vulnerable, particularly under the leadership of a woman, albeit an aging one. He sent a series of insulting letters, implying that Lady Isabella was too old and frail to defend her family's interests, and suggesting that she should simply yield the disputed territory. He expected a quick capitulation, or at best, a weak protest. Instead, Lady Isabella, without missing a beat, composed a meticulously detailed reply, citing decades of legal precedent, referencing ancient charters, and warning him of the full weight of the De Warenne alliances should he dare to challenge her. She dispatched trusted messengers to her powerful network of connections at court, quietly mobilizing support. Her son, Sir Arthur, stood fully behind her, his own formidable reputation adding weight to her words. The neighboring lord, realizing his miscalculation and the deep respect Lady Isabella still commanded, quickly retreated, his initial disrespect turning into a reluctant admiration for her unyielding resolve. Lady Isabella's enduring authority, not merely as a figurehead but as an active and highly respected decision-maker, stood as a testament to the fact that, for those with wealth, influence, and a proven track record, old age could indeed be a source of continued power and profound respect, not a diminishment. Her life stands as an example of how skill, experience, and the right social standing could ensure that an elder, especially a woman, retained her active agency and her position of honor within a powerful medieval family. Number 9. The beggar's folly in the city. In the sprawling, crowded streets of 13th century, London life was a constant struggle for survival, and the elderly poor often found themselves at the very bottom of society's harsh hierarchy. Old Edwin, a man in his late 60s, had once been a prosperous merchant, but a series of misfortunes, a shipwreck, a devastating fire, and a plague that claimed his family had left him utterly destitute. He was now a common beggar, his clothes ragged, his face gaunt, his few remaining teeth loose in his gums. He spent his days huddled in the shadow of St. Paul's Cathedral, his hand outstretched, whispering pleas for alms. His age, far from eliciting sympathy, often drew contempt or indifference. While some individuals driven by Christian charity might offer a copper coin or a crust of bread, the prevailing attitude towards the elderly poor was often one of disdain. They were seen as unproductive members of society, a drain on public resources, and a stark reminder of life's precariousness that many preferred to ignore. Unlike the elderly who maintained wealth or power, those like Edwin who had nothing possessed no leverage, no network of support beyond the most basic and unreliable forms of charity. Their wisdom, born of a life lived, was irrelevant in the face of their destitution. Their experience was seen as a sign of failure rather than accomplishment. The disrespect shown to Edwin and others like him was not always active cruelty, but often a pervasive, dehumanizing indifference. People would avert their gaze, hurry past, or offer a dismissive wave of the hand. Children, learning from their elders, would sometimes mock him, throwing pebbles or shouting insults. Shopkeepers would sweep their doors clean, effectively shooing him away. He was a nuisance, a blight on the urban landscape. The ultimate act of disrespect, however, came from the city authorities themselves, particularly the beadles, the local constables responsible for maintaining order and enforcing civic regulations. The city, concerned with maintaining an appearance of prosperity and order, viewed beggars as a public nuisance and a potential source of disease or unrest. Ordinances were passed against sturdy beggars and vagrants, though these laws often made little distinction between the able-bodied and the infirm elderly. Old Edwin, despite his clear physical infirmities, was often targeted by the beadles, who saw him as an eyesore and an infraction against city cleanliness. One cold autumn morning, a beadle, a burly young man with a disdainful sneer, found Edwin slumped against the wall of a wealthy merchant's house. Instead of offering assistance or directing him to one of the few overcrowded almshouses, the beadle roughly prodded Edwin with his staff, ordering him to move. When Edwin, slow and weak, could not immediately comply, the beadle seized him by the arm, dragging him roughly through the bustling street. He was publicly shamed, accused of loitering and obstructing traffic, and then forcibly escorted to the city limits. Despite his protests and the pain in his old joints, he was told he was not welcome within the city walls and ordered to find shelter elsewhere, knowing full well that elsewhere meant the open road or a desperate scramble for scraps in the countryside. This public expulsion, a deliberate act of removing an unproductive and unwanted senior from the view of the more prosperous citizens, was a profound act of systemic disrespect. It stripped Edwin of any remaining dignity, treating him not as a fellow human being who had fallen on hard times, but as refused to be swept away. His age, which in a different social context might have commanded veneration, instead served to highlight his vulnerability and unworthiness in the eyes of a society that valued productivity and order above all else. His story, repeated countless times in the grimy alleyways and alongside the busy thoroughfares of medieval cities, reveals a dark truth about the treatment of the elderly poor, that without social standing, family support, or financial resources, old age often brought not respect, but callous indifference and active degradation